Ellie grew up under the vast canopy of a world few understood, a world filled with the grunts, roars, and gentle murmurs of gorillas. Her childhood was unlike any other. Rather than dolls or pets, she shared her life with creatures that most people feared. From the moment her father, Mark, brought her to the sanctuary in Belize, Ellie felt an undeniable pull toward the gorillas. They were more than animals to her. They were family. And among them, one stood out: Kumo. Kumo arrived as a vulnerable infant, clinging to life and entirely alone. Poachers had taken his mother, leaving him orphaned, frightened, and in desperate need of a caregiver. From the first moment she held him, Ellie felt as if they shared a silent understanding. She was just a girl, barely old enough to understand the complexity of life and loss. Yet in Kumo's dark, soulful eyes she saw something unmistakable: a spark of trust. They grew up together, Kumo and Ellie. She played by his side, reading stories aloud as he listened with quiet curiosity. She taught him games, guiding him with gentle hands and laughter, and he, in turn, became her greatest friend and confidant. Their connection defied any boundary of species. They were two souls intertwined, sharing a bond that transcended words. Ellie's father watched with a mixture of awe and trepidation, knowing that one day this chapter would have to close. As the sanctuary prepared Kumo and the other gorillas for life back in the wild, Ellie found herself facing an unthinkable reality. She knew it was best for them to be free, to live the life they were meant to. But when the day came, her heart ached with a sadness so profound it felt like part of her was being torn away. She leaned into Kumo, pressing her forehead to his in a final embrace, silently vowing to hold on to every moment they had shared. With Kumo cradled in her arms, Ellie whispered a soft goodbye, and as he was taken away, she was left with a hollow certainty: the jungle would now separate them. Yet as she watched him disappear into the dense forest, she held on to one last hope: that, somehow, their bond would endure across the distance. The day of Kumo's departure dawned with a heavy stillness, the kind that lingers before a storm. Ellie woke early, her heart weighed down by the bittersweet reality she was about to face. Today was the day Kumo and his companion, Taji, would begin their journey back to the wild, to a sanctuary deep within the untouched jungles of Belize. Mark had found a place where gorillas could live free, away from the reach of humans, a haven that would give them a second chance at the life they had been deprived of. Ellie watched as the sanctuary team moved with quiet urgency, preparing crates lined with soft bedding and familiar scents to comfort Kumo and Taji on their journey. Her stomach tightened as she approached Kumo's enclosure, knowing this might be her final chance to say goodbye. When Kumo saw her, he approached the edge, his massive frame moving with a surprising gentleness as if he sensed her sadness. Ellie leaned against the enclosure's bars, reaching out as Kumo pressed his head against her hand, just as he'd done countless times before. She closed her eyes, feeling his warmth, and imagined she could hold on to him forever. But the crates stood ready, and time was slipping away. She pulled him into one last embrace, whispering softly, "Be brave, Kumo. This is your home now." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with something almost human, a reflection of the trust and love they shared. One by one, the sanctuary staff began leading Kumo and Taji toward the crates. The gorillas hesitated, glancing back at Ellie and Mark as if seeking reassurance. With a gentle nudge, Ellie signaled that it was okay, and they both entered the crates without resistance. She placed her hand on Kumo's crate, offering one last moment of comfort. She hoped he would remember this touch, this feeling, even after the miles stretched between them. As the truck rolled away, Ellie stood motionless, watching until it disappeared down the dirt road. Her heart felt raw, like a wound that had only just begun to heal. This was what she had always wanted for Kumo, to see him free. But as the dust settled, she realized a part of her had been left in that crate, carried with him into the unknown, bound by a love that even the wild could not break. Months turned into years, and the sanctuary's updates about Kumo and Taji dwindled. For Ellie, each report brought a mix of relief and longing. Mark had traveled to the sanctuary once, bringing back the news that Kumo and Taji had not only adapted but had found a place within a family group. They roamed freely, basking in the lush wilderness of their new home. They had made the jungle their own, living as they were always meant to, free from human interference. But for Ellie, the heartache lingered. She often sat by the sanctuary's gates, staring off into the horizon as if she could will Kumo back to her. Her childhood had been spent alongside him. He was her confidant, her friend, her family. Now, as she worked tirelessly with the Foundation, saving countless animals and reintroducing them to their natural habitats, she carried a quiet ache within her, a space only Kumo could fill. The years of separation had not lessened her love for Kumo, but life had changed her too. She had grown into a young woman with responsibilities, following in her father's footsteps to continue the mission they both cherished. But on quiet nights, as she looked at old photographs, memories of Kumo and Taji would surface, filling her with a mixture of pride and melancholy. Then, one day, the unthinkable happened. Mark suffered a sudden health scare. For Ellie, the reality of loss felt like a wave crashing over her, a reminder of all that time had taken away. Mark, however, recovered and, with newfound determination, announced he wanted to return to Belize one last time, to see the sanctuary, the animals, and the place he held dear. The trip, he said, was a chance to say his final goodbyes to the jungle that had given him and his family so much purpose. When Ellie heard of his plan, her heart skipped a beat. The possibility of seeing Kumo again was something she hadn't dared to hope for in years. But could Kumo still remember her? Or was she just another human face lost to time? Everyone warned her against going, saying the gorillas had grown wild and she might be forgotten. But Ellie knew she had to take this chance, whatever the outcome. Holding on to hope, she prepared herself to see Kumo, even if it meant her heart breaking all over again. Ellie's heart was set, but her resolve was met with hesitations and warnings. Friends, colleagues, even some of the sanctuary's most experienced staff urged her to reconsider. Ellie, it's been almost 20 years, they said. Kumo and Taji have become completely wild. They might not recognize you, and seeing them like that could hurt more than you realize. Their concerns rang with truth, but Ellie knew her heart's desire was stronger than any warning. Mark, however, understood her unspoken longing. He saw the quiet ache in her eyes, the unyielding bond she held for the gorillas she'd grown up with. He too felt the weight of time, of separation, and knew what it meant to miss a life so profoundly intertwined with nature. "You should come with me," he said softly one evening. His words broke through her worries, giving Ellie the permission she had been waiting for. It was enough. She wouldn't let anyone's fears hold her back. Not when there was a chance, however slim, that Kumo might remember. Preparing for the journey felt surreal, a blend of excitement, nerves, and nostalgia swirling within her. The first leg of the trip was a flight into Belize, a land she hadn't seen since she was a child, yet one that was stitched into the fabric of her memories. But their journey wouldn't end with the flight. There were no direct roads to the sanctuary's remote jungle, no airports nearby. From the small village where they landed, they traveled in a rugged off-road vehicle, bouncing over muddy trails and fording shallow rivers, the dense green walls of the rainforest closing in around them. Finally, they reached a base camp, a small clearing nestled on the banks of a winding river. There, they would spend the next few days, with guides ready to help them find Kumo and Taji's family. Ellie's heart pounded as they planned the next steps. The guides were clear. If they spotted the gorillas, they were not to approach immediately. They would have to wait, watch, and only get closer if the gorillas allowed it. Ellie nodded, but her mind was elsewhere, fixed on a single question that she held close to her heart. Would Kumo, her childhood friend and confidant, recognize her after all this time? The answer lay somewhere beyond the thick veil of trees, waiting to reveal itself. In the dim light of dawn, Ellie and Mark set off from the camp with their guides, the jungle around them a vibrant symphony of rustling leaves, bird calls, and distant animal cries. The thick canopy above seemed to swallow them whole, casting dappled shadows across the path as they traveled in a small boat along the winding river. The guides had explained that moving by river would reduce their scent trail, keeping their presence as unobtrusive as possible. The boat slipped through the murky water, surrounded by towering trees and thick undergrowth. Ellie's heart beat faster with each passing moment, her gaze scanning the forest edges, hoping for even a fleeting glimpse of familiar faces. She clutched the side of the boat, 1,000 memories flooding back as the jungle seemed to whisper fragments of her childhood. The air was thick with tension, a quiet anticipation hanging over them like a delicate thread. As they rounded a bend, the boat slowed and Ellie's breath caught in her throat. Hidden in the dense foliage, dark shapes moved, blending seamlessly with the shadows. Then a face emerged. A familiar, intense gaze peered back at them, curious and wary. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Kumo. He was larger, more imposing than she remembered, his chest broad, his movements confident. But in those eyes she saw a glimmer of something she'd hoped for but hadn't dared to believe. Recognition. The guides whispered for Ellie and Mark to remain still, reminding them to wait and observe. Her hands trembled with the urge to reach out, to call Kumo's name, but she held back, respecting the distance, letting him make the first move. Kumo watched them for a long, measured moment, before taking a cautious step forward, his gaze never leaving Ellie's. Her heart swelled as she recognized the gentle, curious soul within him. The friend she had held so close to her heart all these years. Tears pricked her eyes as she realized he hadn't forgotten. Kumo lifted his head, sniffing the air, and then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he moved closer to the riverbank, his eyes softening as he regarded her. In that fragile silence, a bond rekindled, a bond neither distance nor time could sever. Ellie's hands trembled as Kumo stepped closer, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her heart ache. He was cautious, his massive frame towering over her, yet his gaze held a gentleness that spoke of distant memories, of a trust once shared. Time seemed to stand still as she slowly reached out, her hand hovering, unsure if he would accept her presence or turn away. Kumo inched forward, his broad shoulders tensed, his nostrils flaring as he took in her scent. For a fleeting moment, Ellie feared he would retreat, that perhaps he no longer recognized her. But then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he placed his head against hers, just as he'd done so many times in their childhood days. Her breath caught as a surge of memories flooded her, long afternoons spent together, laughter, games, and quiet moments of companionship. It was as if no time had passed, and in that instant she knew their bond had endured. Tears streamed down her face as she placed a gentle hand on Kumo's massive shoulder, feeling the warmth beneath his thick fur. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned closer, his powerful arms resting gently by her side, his head nestled against her, a gesture of trust and affection. Ellie whispered softly to him, her voice catching as she murmured words of love, letting him know that she had never forgotten him, that she had carried him in her heart every single day. Just then, Taji appeared, watching them with curious eyes. His approach was slow, his gaze cautious but kind. Ellie extended her hand, and to her relief, Taji responded with a soft grunt, touching her face with a single finger, as if to confirm she was real. The gentle brush of his hand brought a fresh wave of tears, and she let herself feel the overwhelming relief, the gratitude, and the love that had never faded. Mark approached carefully, and the gorillas turned to him, seeming to recognize the fatherly figure who had once cared for them. Kumo and Taji moved around him playfully, a spark of joy lighting their eyes, as though they, too, were remembering days gone by. In those precious moments, surrounded by the warmth of the jungle and the companionship of her long-lost friends, Ellie felt whole. It was a reunion she had only dreamed of, a reminder that true bonds could survive the tests of time and distance. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the jungle, Ellie knew the moment to say goodbye was drawing near. Her heart ached at the thought of leaving Kumo and Taji once more, yet she understood this was where they belonged, wild, free, surrounded by their true home. The gorillas sensed the shift too. They moved closer, reluctant to let her go, their soft grunts conveying an unspoken sadness. Kumo approached Ellie, his deep, soulful eyes searching hers as though asking if she really had to leave. He rested his head gently against her chest, a gesture so tender it brought fresh tears to her eyes. She wrapped her arms around him, feeling the warmth of his body, the familiar weight and presence she had missed for so many years. In that quiet embrace, she whispered her final goodbye, telling him how much she loved him and how he would forever hold a special place in her heart. With a soft, steady hand, she brushed her fingers along his head, as she had done when he was just a young, frightened gorilla. Kumo closed his eyes, savoring the touch, his fingers resting lightly on her arm as if he, too, understood the finality of their parting. Taji moved close, wrapping his powerful arms around both Ellie and Kumo, holding them in a gentle embrace that spoke volumes of the family they once were. Mark joined them, his eyes filled with a quiet sadness and pride as he watched the bond his daughter shared with these magnificent creatures. He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, signaling that it was time to return to the boat. Reluctantly, Ellie pulled away, her hands lingering for a moment longer on Kumo, memorizing the feel of him, the warmth of his presence. As she and Mark made their way back to the boat, Kumo and Taji watched from the riverbank, their silhouettes framed by the fading light. Ellie could hear their soft, mournful grunts as the boat drifted away, echoing through the jungle, a haunting melody of love and loss. She waved one last time, her heart heavy yet filled with gratitude. As the boat carried her down the river, Ellie knew she would forever cherish this moment. She had found her beloved friends once more, only to leave them again. But this time, she carried with her a peace that distance could never diminish. Their bond had endured, unbroken by years or separation, reminding her that love transcends all boundaries. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our latest videos. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Thank you all for taking the time to watch, and see you in the next video.